Greetings, everyone, and welcome to this edition of Disaster Hack. I'm glad you've joined us. I hope you're doing well and staying healthy. Let's get started. Our video today is a follow-up to the video I posted on December 31st, 2022. In that video, I provided an overview of damage assessment after disasters. Well, a lot has changed in terms of how damage assessments are conducted, so I thought I'd better provide an update to get you caught up with the times. In this session, I will provide a quick and simple review about damage assessments after disasters. I will then explain why damage assessment is actually a very complex function. Next, we'll identify how technology is increasingly vital for gathering and sharing information about damage assessments. I'll conclude with some recommendations that might help you complete damage assessments if your community has unfortunately been impacted by a disaster. To begin, let's review for a moment the different types, methods, and participants involved in damage assessment. In terms of the types of damage assessment, we might simplify them into one of three categories. First, there's a rapid assessment. The purpose of this type of assessment is to quickly gather information so you can understand the scope of the disaster you're dealing with. This type of assessment is very general and somewhat superficial. It simply helps you to identify the consequences of disasters that must be addressed so you can begin in earnest your response and recovery operations. The second type of damage assessment is labeled a preliminary damage assessment. This is more detailed and comprehensive than a rapid assessment. It is an assessment that includes a summary of facts about damages to homes, businesses, and public property such as roads, a courthouse, a school, or other government facilities. This type of assessment is necessary since FEMA will want to understand the quantity and possible costs of damages to make a decision about issuing a presidential or federal disaster declaration. The final type of damage assessment is often called a technical or engineering assessment. This assessment verifies numbers and financial costs that were identified in the preliminary damage assessment. This is a very focused type of assessment. It ensures accuracy of preliminary assessments, and it also provides recommendations on what is specifically needed for repair or replacement. There are different means to conduct rapid, preliminary, and technical damage assessments. One method of assessing damages after a disaster is to drive around the community in a vehicle. In this case, the goal is to survey damages as you commute around the jurisdiction. This is known as a windshield assessment. A second method to assess damages is to view them from above. A good example of this is the use of a plane or helicopter to view the extent of the devastation. Political leaders often use aerial assessments to understand the scope of large disasters. Incidentally, both the windshield and aerial assessments are utilized for rapid damage assessments. A final means of assessing damages is to complete an in-person site visit. This implies visiting the location of damages, walking at the scene, and inspecting losses with first-hand observation. A site visit could be used for any type of damage assessment, but it is utilized most for preliminary, technical, and engineering assessments. A site visit is especially useful to identify damages within a building due to flooding that has subsided, or to ensure a building is structurally stable after an earthquake. Sometimes damages cannot be fully understood and appreciated unless they are seen in person. When we review what is known about damage assessments, we might think of specific individuals and organizations that frequently participate in this function. This may include Red Cross personnel and building inspectors in the field, a political leader such as the mayor, governor, or president who wants to know about the status of the disasters, engineers who provide more detailed technical assessments, emergency managers who collect information in the local or state EOC, and FEMA personnel who verify damages at the scene, or others who collect data at the regional or federal levels. Now, everything I've shared with you is accurate, but I need to stress that it is overly simplistic and far too incomplete. So let's take a minute to explore the complexities of damage assessment, the things that go beyond the ordinary or expected. First, I want to stress that there is some other terminology that is frequently mentioned by those involved in emergency management. An impact assessment is a very broad assessment. It looks at many variables including injuries, deaths, damages, economic consequences, psychological results, and overall disruption to individuals, families, businesses, and the community as a whole. An impact assessment is therefore a broad survey of what has happened along with the myriad of negative outcomes. This type of assessment helps first responders, emergency managers, and public officials know what needs to be done and begin to prioritize response and recovery operations. A damage assessment is related in some ways to an impact assessment. In fact, we might say that the overall impact assessment might be needed before you can begin a formal damage assessment. However, a damage assessment is different than an impact assessment in that it is focused more on physical damages and financial losses. The gathering of specific damage assessment numbers helps to determine if a disaster declaration is warranted and may play a role in obtaining outside financial assistance from state and federal governments. Therefore, an impact assessment helps you to identify overall priorities, while a damage assessment may be key in accessing individual and public assistance from the Federal Emergency Management Agency. Another point that needs to be emphasized is that there are many more methods to evaluate damages beyond a windshield assessment, an aerial assessment, and a site visit. For instance, a satellite may be used to examine before and after pictures related to a hurricane. A boat may be needed to assess damages after a flood. A crane or a hoist may be needed to evaluate the damages to bridges. A drone could be used to survey the consequences of wildfires in remote settings or earthquakes in urban areas. A special camera may be needed to examine damages to water lines. Here's another example. After a recent disaster, I talked to an individual that told me that he and others rode bikes and scooters in neighborhoods to gather information about damages. He told me he and his colleagues used their phones to take pictures of trees that had fallen and broken cement panels on the sidewalk. In addition, more and more communities are turning to GIS programs, social media, and special applications to help collect damages. I'll talk about those in just a minute. In addition to the people I have already mentioned in an earlier slide, there are many other individuals and organizations that become involved in damage assessments. The victims themselves may report what has happened to their home and the losses they have sustained. First responders will relay information about damages when they arrive at the disaster scene. 911 operators will share information about damages with emergency managers, politicians, and other public officials. Insurance companies will send in personnel to verify damages and begin to process claims. The operators of critical infrastructure will be involved, whether this is in relation to roads, bridges, hospitals, electrical grids, water systems, or even nuclear power plants. Politicians will become interested in damage assessment tallies so they can advocate for their constituents. Librarians, zookeepers, and nursing home administrators will assess damages. Computer experts and GIS specialists will help tally results. Historic preservationists may need to be involved if older buildings are damaged. School principals and university officials will need to record and relay information about damages, as will the leaders over public works, transportation, parks and rec, the Department of Forestry, the Department of Health and Human Services, and others locally, regionally, or nationally. Participants could include tribal governments, those who manage sports venues, airport operators, railroad officials, nonprofit organizations, clergy from various churches, hazardous materials responders, environmental specialists, state emergency management leaders, representatives from the Small Business Administration, and beyond. In fact, the number of participants is only limited by the types of damages sustained. Any organization that is affected, or any stakeholder that has a vested interest, could and will likely be involved. Let me share with you two interesting cases to illustrate who else might need to help with damage assessment. A recent major windstorm in Utah uprooted trees in a cemetery, and archaeologists had to be called in to help city leaders understand the impact of damages on headstones and caskets. In another case, a painting, not this one pictured here of course, was damaged at a church after an earthquake. State and FEMA officials attempted to contact an expert in Europe to put a price tag on the damage sustained. There were only 2 people in the world that understood the value of this painting. The major point is to think comprehensively about who might be involved in damage assessments. There are countless individuals and organizations that could help you undertake this vital function after disasters. As mentioned earlier, technology has really transformed the way disaster response and recovery operations are completed now. So I want to switch to this topic. Over the past decade, a lot of research has been conducted on how emergency managers and public officials may use social media to evaluate disaster impacts. It is estimated that over 60% of the world population uses social media platforms such as Facebook, X, formerly Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, WhatsApp, Snapchat, Telegram, Reddit, YouTube, and others. When people post information about disasters, this data can be collected and analyzed to determine what happened, what the impacts are, where most of the damaged areas are, etc. Crowdsourcing and the use of AI can help emergency managers and political leaders identify needs and hotspots after a disaster. For instance, if everyone is posting information about damages near the fish market in Seattle, this can help identify where damage assessment personnel may need to be sent. There is a whole host of additional electronic tools available to capture and relay damages after disaster. Smartphones, tablets, and computers can use software such as the ones mentioned here and others like SAS Viewer or Google Drive to note the address of the property in question, identify damages, and begin to calculate financial losses. Some of these programs can be purchased in advance from vendors. Others can be created when needed by IT and GIS specialists. These programs can use drop-down menus which allow the user to enter addresses, note if the owner has insurance, and capture photographic and video evidence of the damages. It is important to note that the programs will be most adept at capturing losses if original property value data is collected before an event. Of course, it is important to point out that these apps can allow one to record information about damages to roads, bridges, and other critical infrastructure as well. As can be seen, the advantages of this technology are innumerable. The public can report their own damages through their phones and thereby save government personnel an enormous amount of time and money. I am aware of various cases where the city's mobile app and website can be used by residents to report damages. With these technological tools, a number of public servants can be put to work to complete damage assessments. One person I interviewed stated, "We have the ability to have a lot of people conduct these damage assessments, and this is important because time is of the essence." Emergency managers and public officials in the EOC can also monitor damage assessment processes and results in real time because of these damage assessment applications. One of the individuals I interviewed stated that the software they used for damage assessment was flexible and easy to use. It was intuitive based on the online forms and drop-down menus. Computers and software programs can also increase accuracy. One emergency manager told me the technology forced people to document better than we would have in the past. Technology allows FEMA officials to understand and verify losses in a more efficient manner. The ability to verify through reports with digital pictures sped up the declaration and disaster recovery process. Finally, the data collected during damage assessment can be used to track progress on recovery activities. For instance, the various programs can note if a project needs to be assigned, is in progress, or has been completed. For those involved in damage assessment, it is imperative to keep in mind the potential drawbacks of technology. The program used to assess damages can be expensive, costing jurisdiction $5,000, $10,000, or $15,000 or more annually. An in-house program can be set up, but it will require someone who possesses this type of technical expertise, and it may take some time, which you don't always have after a disaster. Another possible problem is that the hardware and software may not work if there's no power or internet connectivity. Fortunately, if devices have been charged, they can store information until it can be uploaded at a later time. Finally, if various communities utilize different software or employ diverse methodologies to track damages, this can cause problems for those collecting and assessing damages at the state or federal level. There are countless other challenges relating to damage assessments, and these may have nothing to do with technology. People may misunderstand their role in reporting damages. For instance, after one disaster, some people called the city to report their damages instead of sharing them on a designated website. In other cases, people want to wait for FEMA to come and assess damages. They do not comprehend the order of how the process works. Victims may also be emotional and not report damages in an accurate way. For example, they may report prior damages, or they may exaggerate claims. Disaster victims may also want to return home and resume their normal lives, but the nature of the damages may not make this possible after disaster. Also, it is possible that assessments may be completed after individuals and community groups have already cleaned up debris. This makes it difficult to document damages and seek reimbursement. Damage assessment is also very complex. After a disaster, one emergency manager reported that there were multiple people doing the same work over and over again, which was then distributed to different organizations instead of a single entity. Damage assessments will be questioned if they do not follow FEMA and state guidelines. Finally, events like COVID-19 may make virtual damage assessments more important. Virtual assessments can save the government a lot of money in travel costs, but this can pose challenges because guidelines and processes may not be fully developed yet. One of the most important things I would like to share with you is the need to be proactive. First and foremost, do not assume you can just wing damage assessments after a disaster. It is possible, of course, but it is certainly not the ideal. Consider the lessons you have learned from prior disasters in your jurisdiction, or obtain after-action reports and learn from the experiences of others. Find out what works for damage assessments and what pitfalls you should avoid. Next, you must develop a plan for damage assessments. This should be a function that is every bit as vital as warning, evacuation, sheltering, volunteer management, donations management, debris management, etc. As you write your plan, keep in mind the various purposes of damage assessments, who can and should be involved, and what technology will be required. Be sure that you train all of the possible participants in expectations for damage assessments, required processes and methodologies, and in the use of technology. Exercise this function and test people to see if they remember their roles and responsibilities in damage assessment. Also, be sure to establish mutual aid agreements with others who can help you. For example, it is very likely you will not have enough trained building inspectors in your jurisdiction. When a disaster strikes, be sure to let victims know if and how they can self-report damages. You will need to publicize the app or website being used to report impacts and losses. You will also need to gather your damage assessment team members physically or virtually to review expectations and guidelines. Be clear about assignments on where people are assigned and what types of damages they are looking for, whether it be in homes, businesses, government buildings, roads, and other infrastructure. Ensure everyone knows the methods to record damages and what the standard is for partially destroyed, major impacts, and total losses or condemned structures. Keep in mind that damage assessments can require a lot of work over several days and even weeks. Finally, encourage everyone to be thorough and complete so there will be no questions about damages, quantity, financial losses, etc. These and other things, especially finding ways to harness the use of technology, can help you implement and conduct an effective damage assessment process after a disaster. If you would like additional information about damage assessments, you may want to consider the following book. Well, I hope this video was helpful. Good luck on fulfilling an important function after disasters occur. If you have other suggestions or ideas, please share those comments with others. Have a great day.